The last piece of the puzzle. The sun hung low in the sky, casting long, golden rays across the gleaming towers of downtown Long Beach, California. Grayson Tanner stood in his penthouse office, gazing out over the sprawling city beneath him. The view from the floor-to-ceiling windows was nothing short of spectacular, an uninterrupted panorama of the port of Long Beach, an industrial maze of cranes, containers, and cargo ships. It was a vista of power, success, and dominance, much like the life Grayson had meticulously built for himself. At 45, Grayson had it all: wealth, influence, and a future that seemed as unshakable as the city itself. His salt and pepper hair was carefully styled, and the sharp lines of his tailored Tom Ford suit only enhanced his imposing presence. Every inch of his demeanor screamed success, from the cold, calculating glint in his eyes to the way he held himself, always in control. Grayson's fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern against the smooth surface of his polished mahogany desk. He didn't tolerate delays, and the project on his mind was facing just that. He was about to finalize the largest expansion of his business empire, a move that would take Tanner Shipping from a national powerhouse to an international juggernaut. But there was one obstacle standing in the way: a zoning issue with the local government. His assistant's voice crackled over the intercom, breaking his reverie. "Mr. Tanner, your 4 p.m. is here." Grayson didn't even glance at the door as he responded smoothly, "Send him in, Melissa." The door opened with a soft click, and in stepped David Chen, a man in his mid-30s, looking every bit the part of a high-powered lawyer, except for the nervous tension that clung to him like a second skin. Grayson, however, was in no mood to entertain weakness. With a swift, dismissive gesture, he indicated the chair across from him. "Mr. Chen." Grayson's voice was smooth, but the edge beneath it was undeniable. "I trust you have good news for me." David Chen swallowed audibly, his face paling as his nerves took hold. "Mr. Tanner, we've run into some complications with the zoning board. They're pushing back on the environmental impact study." "Complications?" Grayson interrupted, his voice sharpening like a blade. "I don't pay you for complications, David. I pay you for results." The young lawyer flinched, but pressed on, his voice trembling. "If we could just have a little more time, sir, we could make adjustments and—" "Time." Grayson's towering figure loomed over the desk as he rose from his chair, eyes narrowing. "Time is money, and money is something I have in abundance. What I don't have is patience for incompetence." David's face drained of color. "Please, sir, just a little more." 48 hours, Grayson cut him off, his tone final. 48 hours to make this issue disappear, or I will find someone who can." David didn't even attempt to argue. He stood quickly, nodding frantically. "Yes, sir. I'll get right on it." As the door closed behind him, Grayson allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. This was his world, a high-stakes, high-pressure game where only the strongest survived. He thrived in it, lived for it. No one had ever doubted his ability to bend the world to his will, and Grayson wasn't about to let that change now. His phone buzzed on the desk, interrupting his thoughts. Grayson looked down to see a message from his broker. Tanner Shipping stock up 3%, projected to rise further on Q3 earnings. Grayson smiled to himself, feeling a brief surge of pride. He had made it. He was at the top, and nothing was going to knock him off his perch. But even as the world outside his windows shimmered in the golden light of a perfect evening, Grayson was not immune to the past that lingered, a past that for years he had successfully buried beneath his rising empire. His eyes flicked to the photographs on his desk. Most of them featured Victoria, his second wife, the one who fit seamlessly into his life of wealth and luxury. There was Victoria at the Cannes Film Festival, looking radiant in a backless gown. Victoria on their yacht in St. Tropez, her laughter carefree. And Victoria at their wedding 2 years ago, smiling triumphantly as she had become the jewel of his public image. But tucked behind those glossy images was a photo that didn't belong. It was an older photograph of a younger Grayson, standing arm in arm with a woman who radiated warmth, Catherine, his first wife, the woman he had left behind as he climbed to the top. For a fleeting moment, something like regret flickered across Grayson's face. He pushed it away quickly, replacing it with his usual cool detachment. Catherine was in the past, a stepping stone to where he was now. She was nothing more than a distant memory, a reminder of a life he no longer needed. Grayson picked up the photo, his fingers hesitating only for a moment before he slid it back into its hiding place behind the other pictures. He focused on the present, the future, his empire. He stood and moved to the windows, his gaze sweeping over the city once more. The view was breathtaking. The skyline bathed in the last rays of the sun, casting a warm glow over everything. It was a reminder that Grayson Tanner had won. He had built this empire with his own two hands, and no one could take it away from him. Not today. Not ever. But life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. And as Grayson turned away from the window, his phone buzzed again. This time, the message was different. It was a simple notification, but it would change everything. From James Woodward, Price and Associates. Subject: Will reading. Sebastian Callahan. Mr. Tanner, we require your presence tomorrow at 2 p.m. for the reading of Mr. Sebastian Callahan's will. The name hit Grayson like a sudden, cold gust of wind. Sebastian Callahan, a reclusive billionaire who had been a silent partner in some of Grayson's early ventures. They hadn't spoken in years, and as far as Grayson knew, Callahan had no heirs, no family. Grayson's mind raced. If Callahan had no family, his fingers tightened around the phone as a smile spread across his face, slow and deliberate. This could be huge. A sense of anticipation gripped him, and for the first time in a long while, Grayson felt his pulse quicken with excitement. Tomorrow, the pieces of his empire could grow even bigger. And in that moment, with the promise of even greater wealth and power just within his grasp, Grayson Tanner couldn't have known that fate was already preparing a twist that would change everything. Unbeknownst to Grayson, in a modest apartment across town, Catherine Humphrey was holding the same envelope. Her life, too, was about to collide with his in ways neither of them could foresee. A past revisited. The morning sun was barely rising over Long Beach, painting the horizon in delicate shades of pink and gold. Inside Grayson Tanner's penthouse, the soft chime of his smartphone was the only sound that disturbed the stillness of the early hour. He had barely slept, his mind swirling with thoughts of the upcoming will reading. The thought that he might inherit a fortune that would elevate his empire beyond his wildest dreams had kept him awake all night. Yet, as he glanced at the clock, he realized that his expectations could very well be dashed by a twist of fate that he could not anticipate. Victoria stirred beside him in the bed, her golden hair cascading over the pillow like a halo. Her body shifted lazily, and with a soft murmur, she pressed her hand against his chest. "Morning, darling," she whispered, her voice laced with sleep. "Are you ready for your big day?" Grayson smiled, his lips curling into a faint but confident smirk. More ready than ever. He leaned back against the headboard, the excitement of the upcoming reading still palpable in the air between them. There was no doubt in his mind. Sebastian Callahan's estate would be his, or at the very least, a large portion of it. He had the connections, the knowledge, and most importantly, the resolve to take what he wanted. Victoria stretched lazily and sat up, her eyes brightening as she caught his enthusiasm. "You think he left it all to you, don't you?" she asked, a glint of ambition dancing in her eyes. Grayson didn't hesitate. "It's a distinct possibility," he replied, his tone almost smug. "Callahan had no family, no heirs. If we're being honest, he and I had a special kind of partnership. It's more than likely that he saw me as his legacy." Victoria grinned. "Well, that would be perfect, wouldn't it? Tanner shipping on a global scale, with billions to fund the expansion. The Henderson deal, the acquisitions, everything falls into place." Grayson raised his glass of champagne in a toast to the future. Exactly, he said, savoring the idea of his next triumph. He could already taste the success. And once we take over, no one will be able to touch us. But even as he spoke, a subtle unease settled in the pit of his stomach. He couldn't shake the thought that something might be off. Grayson wasn't a superstitious man. He was practical, driven, and focused. But something about this reading felt different. He pushed the feeling aside, determined not to let anything get in the way of his plans. Meanwhile, across town in a modest apartment, Catherine Humphrey stared out the window, the morning light catching the faint lines of worry etched into her face. The years had not been kind to her. Unlike Grayson, whose life had continued to soar to greater heights, Catherine had been left behind. She had spent years rebuilding her life after the painful divorce, struggling to make ends meet, all while Grayson moved on to a new life of luxury and excess. Now, sitting at her small kitchen table, she turned over the envelope in her hands once more. The letter had arrived yesterday, but its contents still confused her. Why had she been summoned to the will reading of Sebastian Callahan, a man she had never met? Catherine's fingers trembled slightly as she opened the letter, her eyes scanning the familiar words again. Dear Ms. Humphrey, we regret to inform you of the passing of Mr. Sebastian Callahan. As per his last will and testament, your presence is requested at the reading of the will. The letter was official, its bold legal seal unmistakable. But the name, Sebastian Callahan, meant nothing to her. She had no connection to him, or so she thought. Catherine glanced at the clock, noting that it was nearly time for her to leave. In less than an hour, she would be sitting in a law office, facing people she did not know, in a room filled with wealth and power she had long since abandoned. The thought made her stomach churn, but she held her head high. She had been through so much already. She could handle this too. Her reflection in the window stared back at her, a woman who had endured heartache and disappointment, yet had learned to persevere. She had learned the hard way that life was unpredictable. And sometimes, things didn't go the way you planned. But that didn't mean she was powerless. Catherine had rebuilt herself once. She could do it again. As she dressed and prepared to leave, the familiar ache of memory tugged at her heart. She allowed herself a moment to remember the life she had once shared with Grayson. The parties, the vacations, the security she had taken for granted. But that had been before he left her for someone younger, before his ambition consumed him, and he discarded everything that had once mattered. Catherine knew it was futile to dwell on the past. Grayson had made his choices. Now she was left to face whatever the future had in store. As she slipped on her coat and grabbed her purse, a small part of her wondered if she would see him today, if he would even remember her. Would he even care? Meanwhile, across town, Grayson had already made his way to the law office, the anticipation of the reading building inside him with each passing minute. He entered the sleek, modern building with the confidence of a man who had already won. The receptionist greeted him with a polite smile, and he was led into a private meeting room where a long, polished table awaited. Grayson took a seat, his eyes scanning the room. His heart beat a little faster with excitement. But there was something else, a flicker of curiosity. He had no idea what to expect, but his instincts told him that something significant was about to unfold. Minutes later, the door opened again, and a woman entered. Grayson didn't need to ask who she was. He recognized her immediately. Catherine, his first wife. She hadn't changed much. Her hair was longer, though streaked with gray now. She still carried herself with dignity, though the years had been harder on her than on him. There was a subtle tension in the air as their eyes met, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. Grayson felt an unfamiliar pang in his chest, something he hadn't expected. It was an odd mix of nostalgia and regret, but he quickly masked it, clearing his throat as he straightened in his chair. Catherine finally broke the silence, her voice soft but steady. Grayson, I didn't expect to see you here. Grayson gave a curt nod, his expression unreadable. I could say the same. Catherine's gaze flicked to the table, where the legal documents lay in front of them. "I assume you've been called here for the same reason I have," she said, her words tinged with a mixture of confusion and wariness. Grayson gave a tight-lipped smile, leaning back in his chair. "It seems we both have a stake in what's about to happen." The lawyer entered the room, a man in his 50s with a calm demeanor and a no-nonsense attitude. He wasted no time with pleasantries. "Mr. Tanner, Ms. Humphrey," he said, "thank you for joining us today. We're here to read the will of Mr. Sebastian Callahan." He adjusted his glasses and laid the documents on the table. "I know this may come as a surprise, but you both have been named beneficiaries in his will." Grayson's eyebrows furrowed slightly. "Beneficiaries?" His voice was low, almost disbelieving. The lawyer nodded, his expression grave. "Yes, Mr. Tanner. And Ms. Humphrey, there's something you both need to hear." The words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and for the first time, Grayson felt something other than control. Uncertainty. As the lawyer began reading, neither Grayson nor Catherine could have anticipated the twist that was about to shatter everything they had known. The unseen hand. The room fell silent as the lawyer's voice echoed in the stillness, each word weighing heavily on the two former spouses. Grayson sat forward, his sharp gaze never leaving the lawyer, while Catherine clenched her hands in her lap, an uneasiness creeping into her thoughts. "Mr. Tanner, Ms. Humphrey," the lawyer began, his tone uncharacteristically serious. "Sebastian Callahan's will is not a typical one. He was a private man, and his decisions regarding his estate reflect that. While you both have been named as beneficiaries, there are stipulations." Grayson's mind raced, his hands tightening on the arms of his chair. His thoughts darted to visions of untold riches, his empire expanding, his power increasing, but the lawyer's words seemed to douse his enthusiasm like cold water. "Stipulations." Grayson's voice was calm, but it carried a steely edge. "What kind of stipulations?" The lawyer gave a slight, almost imperceptible sigh. Mr. Callahan's wealth was vast. His investments, his partnerships, they spanned industries. But more importantly, he believed in something beyond mere accumulation of wealth. He believed in leaving a legacy. Catherine, who had been sitting in quiet shock, felt her heart skip a beat. A legacy. The question lingered in her mind. Was it possible that Callahan had known something about her, or perhaps even cared about her in some way? Grayson leaned forward, the anticipation now visibly burning in his eyes. "Get to the point," he said, a touch of impatience creeping into his voice. The lawyer nodded, as if prepared for the reaction. "Mr. Callahan left behind a significant portion of his estate, not to you, Mr. Tanner, but to a cause. He wanted to ensure that his money went towards something meaningful, something that would change lives. The stipulation is this: neither of you can receive your inheritance unless you fulfill one requirement. You must take on a personal project, something that directly impacts the lives of others. A charitable act of substance." Catherine blinked, disbelief flooding her senses. "Charity?" Her voice was barely above a whisper. "Are you telling me that Callahan left us a fortune, only to make us work for it in some meaningful way?" The lawyer nodded. "Exactly. You both must choose a cause, something that will require your time, your money, and your influence to make a real difference. You must prove that you are capable of something beyond the pursuit of personal gain. If you succeed, your inheritance will be released in full. If not, it will be redirected to another party." Grayson sat back, his mind reeling. A cause. This wasn't what he had imagined. There was no mention of power, no mention of more wealth to fuel his ambitions, no easy path to dominance, no strings pulled behind the scenes. His hands gripped the armrests, his fingers digging into the leather. "And if we don't comply?" His voice was cold, controlled, but the edge of frustration was unmistakable. The lawyer's gaze softened. "If you don't comply, the estate reverts to charity. The money won't go to your companies, your homes, your ambitions. It will simply disappear into the hands of those who need it the most. Grayson's jaw clenched. He had built an empire by playing by his own rules, manipulating systems, and turning every obstacle into an opportunity. But now, for the first time in his life, he found himself in a position where he couldn't control the outcome. He couldn't manipulate this. The lawyer continued, his voice steady and unwavering. There is a timeline. 1 year. In 1 year, you must show that you have made a measurable difference. You'll be evaluated, both on the personal impact of your efforts and the legacy you leave behind. Catherine, who had been sitting quietly, her mind whirling with thoughts of her own, finally spoke. Her voice was hesitant, but there was a certain resolve in it. And if we succeed? The lawyer gave a small smile, a flicker of approval. If you succeed, your inheritance is yours. It's a chance for both of you to prove that there's more to life than wealth, more to your futures than power. Grayson leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping against the table, his mind working quickly. He wasn't used to being given a choice like this. He was used to taking opportunities, taking control. He could feel the weight of this decision bearing down on him. This wasn't something that could be bought or manipulated. This was real, and the thought of it made him uneasy. Catherine, on the other hand, felt a strange sense of relief wash over her. She'd spent years wondering how she could make her life mean something after her marriage to Grayson fell apart. This was her chance to do something good, to leave behind a legacy of her own. In that moment, Catherine's thoughts drifted back to the days when she and Grayson were young, when they shared dreams of a life they could build together. But over time, those dreams had faded, replaced by the reality of Grayson's ambition and his coldness. It had hurt, but now, in this moment, she realized that she didn't need him or his empire to be valuable. She could create her own meaning. Fine. Grayson finally spoke, breaking the silence, his voice a mixture of annoyance and reluctant acceptance. I'll choose a cause. But make no mistake, I'll be doing this my way. I don't do things unless they benefit me. The lawyer nodded without judgment, his face unreadable. You have the right to approach this however you wish, Mr. Tanner. But remember, this isn't about your business. This is about proving something greater. Catherine turned to Grayson, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. Two people who had once shared everything, now strangers to one another. Grayson's gaze was hard, calculating as ever, but Catherine could see the cracks beneath his armor, the uncertainty, the vulnerability he had hidden for years. For the first time, she didn't feel inferior to him. The lawyer gave one final nod and rose to leave. I'll arrange for your projects to be registered with the foundation. You have 1 year. I'll be in touch. As the door clicked shut behind him, Grayson remained seated, his fingers still tapping against the table. He wasn't sure if this was a curse or a blessing, but one thing was clear. His life, his empire, had taken an unexpected turn. Catherine stood as well, her heart filled with a quiet resolve. This was her chance, her opportunity to create something meaningful, to live a life that wasn't just about surviving but about thriving. She could see the road ahead of her now, not the road she had once traveled beside Grayson, but a road she would walk alone, with dignity and purpose. As they both left the office that day, the city of Long Beach sprawling before them in the distance, neither Grayson nor Catherine could have known how their lives would unfold over the next year. The stakes had changed, and the game had evolved. In the end, it wasn't the inheritance that mattered. It was what they did with the time they had left, the choices they made, the legacies they built, and the way they would forever be remembered. Grayson Tanner had built an empire, but Catherine Humphrey was about to build a legacy of her own. This concludes the story. Thank you for watching until the end. I hope you found it enjoyable. If you did, please consider liking the video and sharing it with your friends. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and activate the notification bell for more captivating stories. Have a great day.